Welcome, friends, to episode 7 of Quest Rewind, the show where we celebrate video games by going back to stuff like the 90s with the Nintendo 64. We had a really great discussion in our first 5 episodes about that, but then afterwards we said, let's go over to the early 2000s and talk about the Xbox 360. And just 2 episodes ago, or I guess you could say it's a bonus, we went back to E3 2005 and did a watch-along, a live reaction of the 2005 press conference where they actually revealed the Xbox 360 and talked about the weird clothing choices and everything else. And then we had a full episode actually talking about that, from the first game they revealed to the odd choices and all that stuff. But now, this is going to be a controversial episode because the Xbox 360, in spite of its success, it was kind of a cluster with the red ring, all of these fail rates, yet it was still very successful. So we'll be talking about that right now with yours truly, Juan Velez from Puerto Rico.
I'm Ryan from Boston.
And I'm Keith from London, Ontario, Canada. Canadian Keith, if you will.
That is indeed the case. And in the previous episode, the three of us acknowledged that we didn't get the Xbox 360 at launch, right? It was one of these things that you started to see some rumors and little things like that. I was still enjoying my PS2, and just when I thought I was going to get that, because the PS3 didn't come out till basically a year later in 2006, right? So here we have the brand new console, but I started to see some stuff. I got a little scared. What about you guys? Did you have a similar type of thing happen?
Pretty much. I was at that age where I started having my own money, but it's not like new console get it day one kind of money. So I saw it at the kiosk we didn't have Best Buy in Canada at the time. We had a store called Future Shop. So I saw it at the kiosk in Future Shop and thought wow, that looks really cool. That's really amazing. I can't afford this right now, so I guess I'm good with my PS2. And then, yeah, like you mentioned, you started seeing all of the things that happened near the launch, the faults for maybe it releasing a little too early, and that kind of persuaded me to, maybe I'm gonna wait a little bit on this one.
Yeah, I had just been happy with the PS2 and the GameCube at this point, and I still had an original Xbox as well. So it was the only time I owned all three of that generation of consoles, and I think I had more than enough games to keep me busy. But the Xbox 360, it wasn't really on my radar in particular at this point in time because I was more interested in waiting to see what PlayStation had to offer. I feel like PlayStation I had more loyalty at that point. I had an Xbox and I had Halo 2, but I wasn't as attached to it as a lot of other people were.
I think that's a really good point that I didn't mention as well, because I had the PS2. I loved my PS2. So there probably was a sense of loyalty that I had towards the PlayStation and waiting to see what the next PlayStation would be.
And just think about that, because it wasn't just a case of 4 or 5 months. It is a whole year. So especially in the whole transition from standard definition to HD, you have this incentive, right? There's a console right now where you can enjoy that. And us as wrestling fans, you know which game I'm talking about. When something like SmackDown vs. Raw 2007 came out, we bought that for the PS2, but then you saw the screenshots for 360 and said, oh, okay, I got to make an upgrade, and I still didn't.
Wow, they look so much sweatier there.
Yeah, there's so much sweat, all the shine. That's how you judge the next
all the
generation.
Extra character creation slots and stuff that they added.
All the future stuff. And everybody, by the way, if you enjoy our podcast, please consider dropping that 5-star review. We publish these on video over at youtube.com/questrewind. We also have our Discord. So if you want to just chat along, talk about previous episodes, this one here, which I know is going to generate a lot of heat in some sort of ways, description for all those details. So before we talk about the issues, right? And with the red ring and of all that stuff, we do have some resources, some links, and we'll make sure to give credit to all that. This is stuff that I kind of forgot about, which is, what did 360 actually come out with? So the console came out in November 22nd, 2005. For context, PS3, November 11th, 2006. So pretty much
almost exactly a year earlier.
exactly. And we got two SKUs. There was a $299 model and $399 model. So the core system, the one that was $200, $299, I should say, came with the console.
American, we're saying,
Yeah, American.
right? Yeah.
Which how $299 American is like what in Canada?
Well, Canadian dollars suck right now. It was a lot better back then. So
Yeah,
it was
back then.
pretty comparable to $299, so maybe it would be like $350
Okay.
at worst. Today it would be like $400 cuz the dollar is a tire fire.
So we got the console, a wire controller. So that's something worth mentioning. Detachable faceplate, Xbox Live Silver membership, and standard AV cables. So that's the hey, I want to get the new console, but there's some stuff. Now let's not react to that. Go ahead.
No, I was going to react to that, so
No,
let's
because
not do that.
I just want to be able to present the other one and just be like, okay, here's the $100 difference. And let's go to $400, right? What did that one get you? Gets you the console, a 20 gigabyte detachable hard drive, wireless controller, wireless Xbox Live headset, high definition AV cables, Ethernet cable, Xbox 360 media remote control, which was only available for a limited time, detachable faceplate, and Xbox Live Silver membership. So once again, $100 difference. Keith, what do you got, buddy?
I mean, they labeled that $299 version the Xbox Core system, and wow, that is maybe one of the truest statements I've ever heard, because yes, there's a couple of bullet points like a wired controller and standard AV cables and Xbox Live Silver, but that's all free stuff. Like, you didn't pay for Xbox Live Silver. That's not much of a bullet point there. You really just got the console for that $299, and then when you add an extra $100, like that really was you're paying a little more, but you're getting a ton of value out of it. Like having that wireless controller, which is just a crazy concept at that time, even though batteries weren't included, and you'd pay an extra $200 in that over its lifetime.
And even if you got the memory cards, think of the price for those. It's like $40-$50.
Mm-hmm. And the detachable hard drive, like if you really wanted to use the Xbox to its full media platform capability, like that was a must to have, because they weren't proprietary. Like you couldn't just get any hard drive and put it into an Xbox at that time. You needed to get their obscure Xbox 360 version hard drive that costs way more than it should, just because it was for an Xbox 360. So it's actually a pretty good value, that $399 one. Having the bullet points on that $299 one is a bit of a scam as far as I'm concerned.
So for the core system, was there any kind of hard drive for it?
No.
Like what? No.
I think
so
there
you
was
had
just a little bit, like enough to save games on, but you couldn't put anything on it. I think I'm going to double check it as the hashtag fact checker, but I think we were working in megabytes in the core system.
Yeah, because keep in mind, the 360 did actually have a memory card. You could get that. They came in 64 megabytes, 256, and 512, and they launched alongside that. So this is kind of like this is for us that came from the PS2 generation. You're like, well, I mean, I got a memory card for the PS2. I guess I need for this one. I'm paying the $300 model, but these aren't $20. So you need that. So it's one of these things where you're saving money in quotes, but really you're not. You're paying a lot more.
Yeah, it's interesting because looking at these two right now, like in hindsight, looking now, core system looks like the biggest piece of garbage I've ever seen in my life, right?
Mm-hmm.
But at the time, if you're supposed to take yourself back to 2005 with people playing PS2 and everything, wired controller still is like a familiar thing. It doesn't feel like this horrible ripoff that why should I even pay this money and still get a wired controller? And the same thing with like the AV cables and not getting at this time it would be the component cables or whatever. So I can see at the time maybe people weren't like, oh, this is just here to make you want to pay the $400. But right now, like from a hindsight perspective, it looks like they made this model just to get you to pay the $400 to be like, okay, I'm not going to get this. It's complete junk. I have to get the $400 one.
It was the most core system possible.
I mean, just think about this. I'm looking up some information. This is from Engadget. In 2007, they released the 512 megabyte memory card, and that was $50. It came with Geometry Wars, so it did come with a game, but still it was 50. And the 64 megabyte one dropped to 30 at that point. So it was actually more expensive. So really, you're kind of saving money if you want to be technical about it, but it was the thing. Now, it is worth pointing out just because you're making the switch to high definition, yet if you got the core system, there's a lot of people like ourselves that maybe we didn't really have an HD TV, that maybe would just go like, okay, whatever. But how many people didn't know that, hey, if you want to play games in HD, you need a different cable. You don't just need the composite, the different color ones. So that was worth pointing out. And then just something quickly, just to gloss over and give some context. Some of the launch games include Amped 3, Call of Duty 2, Condemned. Yeah, Call of Duty 2 is a pretty solid game. It doesn't age.
My God, what a great game!
I don't remember if I played that. I did play the demo for Condemned though. I did do that. FIFA Soccer 06, Gun, which I've actually played. That game is a pretty good third-person Western game. Cameo, Elements of Power, Madden NFL 06, NBA 2K6, NBA Live 06. A lot of 06s and NBAs. Need for Speed Most Wanted, NHL 2K6, Perfect Dark Zero, Peter Jackson's King Kong, the official game of the movie. That is the full name. Okay, you got to get that
and
right.
And the official game of the kiosk that Xbox 360s were in.
That was the showcase title. Project Gotham Racing 3, Quake 4, Ridge Racer 6, Tiger Woods PGA Tour 06, and Tony Hawk's American Wasteland. We don't have too much time to get into like the specific games, but sort of spitballing general impressions. What do you think of that initial offering?
Overall, that's a pretty solid lineup, I would say. Like Amped, Call of Duty, not all of them are winners, that's for sure, but having Amped, Call of Duty, Gun being cross-platform, Cameo, like there is some good game. There were reasons to buy the Xbox 360 if you really wanted that console at the time.
I would say it's very well-rounded. Nothing that's really like, I need to get this console right now, but being well-rounded is impressive because normally, I mean, we see a lot of rough launches with titles, so this is far from the worst.
Yeah, agreed. And here's another thing that's kind of surprising, especially in hindsight. Keep in mind, when I got a 360, it was my wife got a white model, but that one already had an HDMI. The ones at launch, I mean, notice none of the SKUs said HDMI. That's because that didn't exist, which talking about that now seems insane, right? How do you release a high-definition console without that? But let's keep in mind.
With high-definition AV cables in the $299 version, or the $399 version.
Yeah. You got that, which is at least something. But
yeah, I'm a little curious behind the history behind that because you can get, I don't know what, like with the component cables, can you get just as good of like quality? Can you get like 1080p out of component cables versus an HDMI?
I think it's 720, isn't it?
No, you can do 1080, but as somebody that I've used my PS3 with both component and HDMI, there's a clear difference, at least for me. And I know they sold some kind of converter, if I'm not mistaken, but this was a huge issue for a lot of people that wanted to make the full leap to like HD, HDMI, and they did change it. So it's like the minority, right? It's over time, when you look at any 360 console out there used, you're bound to find the HDMI one more than you will the standard one.
Yeah, it kind of felt like the whole HD DVD versus Blu-ray thing. You had the component cables and the HDMI, and HDMI really won that one out.
Yeah, it's almost like a half step because I don't think component cables were meant to succeed. It was to be that thing that people bought between the standard AV cables until HDMI was ready, and then HDMI just blew it out of the water totally.
Yeah, really I have this monstrosity of a cable that to plug my Wii into an HD TV, I got this thing that it can do PS3, Xbox, and Wii, and like it can plug in as a component. It has like the 3 ends for
wow.
each of the consoles. I only bought it for the Wii because obviously I could just use an HDMI with the other consoles, but yeah, it is just like a abomination of a cable that I have to use sometimes when I end up taking,
I think
playing
we all
the Wii.
had that, whether it
Taking
be
a
with the
Wii.
Super Nintendo days, and you could like connect Genesis, like just a way to simplify having so many cables.
Yeah.
But as you mentioned, then you have this one huge freaking cable that's just so inconvenient on the back of a TV.
Yeah, it ain't pretty, but it gets the job done.
It works. It works. And on the flip side of working, let's just get to it. The
Yeah.
Red Ring of Death. I remember before we get to like news, I would love to just get context for us as far as when we first heard about it. And I remember this vividly. So PS2 gamer still at the time, one of my friends was all about getting the newer consoles. And I remember when he told me he picked up a 360, right? But then a couple of months later, he's telling me, no, I'm on my way to get an Xbox 360. And I'm just thinking, wait, legit in my head, I'm thinking, deja vu? Did I overlook something? And he told me, no, mine stopped working, so I'm just getting another one. And he said it so casually. And at this point, I really wasn't using the internet too much, aside from like wrestling forums. And that's when he told me, no, it's got like this red light issue. It's happening a lot. The first one's going to get repaired, but until they fix it, I'd rather just get another one. And to me, as somebody that was economically super tight on a budget, it was mind-blowing that you're buying a second console, not to have two in your house to use simultaneously. Like, no, for when the first one stops working, I'm going to have a backup. That was my first memory of hearing about this. What about you guys?
This almost makes me question the sales numbers of the 360 now and how much the Red Ring maybe inflated it. I think 2007 seems like the year where I feel like a lot of this was like bubbling up a lot. This was when I was like first going into college, and a lot of people had 360s, like my buddies, and I know they were having issues. And you just hear about other people like in other dorm rooms being like, "Oh, got to get a new 360. Mine broke." And yeah, I feel like that was around the time where probably people had played their consoles enough that they were, if they got them in 2005 or 2006, this was like around the time that a lot of them were starting to fail more and more. And yeah, I just remember being like, that scared me because I was just like, no way. If I know it's going to fail, even despite the fact that there was some good exclusives at that point in time for 360, like games like BioShock were not out for PS3 yet.
2007 was a great year for it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I'm just like, no way. Why take the chance? I'm not going to buy another one. And I've heard about how annoying it is to send it in to get it fixed. So yeah, I think about 2 years into the lifespan, I think was when it really was like, reaching that boil.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember on my end because I don't have a vivid memory of when I became aware of it, but I know I watched a lot of G4 at the time, and I imagine I started hearing about it from the programming on that station because I know they would cover a lot of video game stuff, and I imagine the Red Ring of Death was a big thing on, like, as what they would covering, because that was kind of my gateway into learning more about video game journalism, and that would eventually lead me to websites like GameSpot and IGN and those big media outlets. And somewhere along the way on that path, I became aware of the Red Ring and how much of a problem it was. And yeah, much like you, Ryan, it scared me away from getting the Red Ring. Like I was a teenager at that time, and I was tight on a budget, so I needed to make sure that when I spent my money, I was spending it well. And if I was going to spend that money on something like a console, I needed to make sure it was going to work for a long time. And because the failure rate was so high, especially around that 2007 time when it got really crazy and it seemed like every other day somebody was saying, "Oh, I got the Red Ring." Like it got to the point where it was one of the earliest memes on the internet, the Red Ring of Death, because it was just something that you would see constantly constantly, and I didn't want to spend my money on that. Like, I didn't get the 360 till later. I think I ended up getting the PS3 first, even though it was out or earlier, just because the Red Ring and hearing about all the launch problems and failures of the 360 turned me off enough that I was going to wait and see if they figured it out and they fixed it, and I would just get it later eventually, which I did.
And I think a lot of that boils down to what Ryan mentioned regarding brand loyalty, because here, the three of us, we didn't have the console, and we did know each other around this point. So these were conversations we would also have at some point or another. And I remember I was thinking to myself, okay, so we later found out the price point for the PS3, which was freaking ridiculous.
$599 US.
Yep. It's worth getting a second job for, guys.
Yep. And think about that. I didn't have a job at that point. I maybe did some like stuff, I would get paid for, like groceries, like little things like that. I didn't really have a job, but I would rather
lawns.
Exactly. And I would rather, and I did spend $600 on a console. A year later, unknowing of what it would actually be, whether it had faults or not, but it was the third PlayStation as opposed to the second Xbox that maybe cost less, but I started to hear some rumors about the stuff, right? And it's worth pointing out, and we've said it in the previous episode, the 360 is a freaking awesome console. We're not sitting here saying, oh, why you shouldn't get... We're saying, despite all that, that is the course of the conversation here. And Keith, you brought up the failure rates. I'm going to read this from designnews.com, titled Major Failure Rate. So it's not going to go well. And it reads as follows.
Holy
it's
cow.
Even bolded, yeah. It's the serious stuff. The Xbox was plagued with hardware difficulties from its initial release in November 2005. There were a number of issues, such as discs becoming scratched in the drive after its release. Articles started appearing in the game media portraying Xbox 360 failure rates ranging from 23.7% to 54.2%.
That's crazy.
Yeah, that's just ridiculous. A German game magazine revealed that representatives of the three largest Xbox 360 resellers claimed that the failure rate of the Xbox 360 was between 30 to 33%. Now, pausing there, let's go back to the days of, this is before YouTube. This is before a YouTuber would go, 10 reasons you shouldn't buy an Xbox 360. This is before all those lists, right?
Or in 2006.
In 2006, around that point, right? Here, you kind of just go to GameStop and maybe hear about this. You kind of go to Future Shop, or maybe you go to a forum, but it's not common to really get access to a lot of this information. Just looking at those numbers, what do you guys think of that?
That's amazing. Like, going by that German number, which seems to be in the middle of everything else, that is saying 1 in every 3 Xbox 360s that are made will fail. And that's nuts to think about. So, say, like, of every $1,000 that Xbox is putting out of merchandise, $200 or $300 of it will fail. That's nuts to consider. And it just, in the previous episode, we spoke a lot about how the 360 managed to turn it around, and it's looking at numbers like this, it's phenomenal that they actually pulled that off, because it's amazing that people still had trust in it after this time.
Yeah, if we look at, again, going with probably the more accurate of like 30 to 33%, the industry standard accepted rate of failure in this kind of, in the industry was 3 to 5%. So it's more than 10 times going by the 3%. Yeah. So we're talking 10 times more likely to fail than what's acceptable. So it's just ridiculous. And another thing, you mentioned about the discs being scratched, talking about the Xbox 360 model, that disc tray, as opposed to, the technology we saw on the PS3, like the more like disc suction for reading discs or whatever, the disc tray, the decision to use that really was it did damage a lot of people's games because stuff with like the disc tray not working properly and everything like that. It was more likely to ruin games than, like a PS3 was. So that was like another factor into Xbox 3 issues beyond just the red ring.
I totally forgot about that flimsy little disc tray until now. But yeah, I remember I had a friend that had one of those launch models, and they put a game into the Xbox and it just chewed it right up. Like you could hear the lens scratching the game, and it just made you want to die as you listened to it.
And look, this is not the first console to do stuff like that. As a matter of fact, the PS2 Slim. Did either of you ever have the Slim, like the super tiny PS2?
I did have the Slim.
Yeah.
So some of the people, and by some I mean sadly I'm part of that bunch too, there was an issue with the ribbon. When the disc is reading, it's like extracting, it's pulling in and out a ribbon, and if it got stretched, it will be just enough to actually touch a disc. So that happened to me with one game right there. So this is not a new issue with consoles, but definitely not the best first impression you want to have. And I think it really says a lot of the issues. It's like we're talking about disc issues. I don't know, and luckily there wasn't a lot of information with problems about the detachable hard drive, which in hindsight it's interesting, right? Because even though the original Xbox had a hard drives fail all the time, right? How many people lose a crap ton of data? So it does seem like at least that. I tried to do a little bit of research. I didn't read a lot of problems. So that detachable hard drive, it was super expensive, but generally speaking, it seemed to be a little bit better than that. Now, just to piggyback on all this information, here's some more information regarding what happened. Since its release on November 22nd, 2005, many articles have appeared in the media portraying the failure rates. The largest estimate by warranty provider SquareTrade to be 23.7% in 2019. The one thing that always struck me is how defensive people got about it. And look, I know Xbox, PS3, whatever. Let's forget about this. Let's talk about food. If I were to tell you, Ryan, did you know that out of 4 visits, 1 in your favorite restaurants is going to be pure shit? Would that not make you go,
get food
wait a
poisoning
minute?
one in every 4 times you go.
Yeah, would that not just make you go, you know what? I think I'm good.
Yeah, I would not. It wouldn't be worth the risk at all.
Mm-hmm. It really wouldn't. And then this led to Microsoft saying a lot of nothing. It was just pure silence. Here you have just like this massive thing happening. The holiday seasons would roll around, all this stuff. But eventually, it actually did lead to a legal battle, which I can assume this would lead to a lot of other companies because, hey, as somebody that got the PS3, I got the freaking yellow light of death. I don't know if you guys knew about that. Did you know about that?
I had maybe heard a little bit, but
I know
never
it's a
happened
thing.
to me.
I've heard that phrase, but I don't know what causes it or why it happens.
Yeah, the original PS3, the Sexy 60. That's the one with like backwards compatible and all that stuff that Ryan still has when it freaking works.
Still going. I haven't booted it up in like a year and a half, but it's still going.
Just to treat
just
it well.
To see.
Clean off the old jet engine there.
There was like a combination of overheating and other things, which the failure rate to that is very high. The thing is, luckily, it didn't seem to be nearly as high as the 360, and eventually they just phased that model out, so that problem never got to that level. Although, let's be honest, I think even that is more ridiculous considering the price point, right? It's when you're spending $200 more than the most expensive one in the previous one, you would hope that is a little bit better, right?
You would hope, but that doesn't make it okay for the cheaper one to fail at the same time.
That's true.
Yeah, exactly. It's not it doesn't excuse, neither has an excuse. You can't just finger point your way out of it.
You'd be like, oh, we're the cheaper one. No, I still suck.
So for those curious, because you often hear about this like yellow light of death, red ring of death, but what actually is it, right? I remember hearing so many methods. One of my friends, the one that I mentioned, he ended up getting 4 consoles, okay? He bought 4. Not that he got 4 repaired. Across time, it
You
got
know?
to the point where he got 4 consoles.
As a married man, I applaud his level of commitment and don't think I will be able to reach it in my lifetime. That is amazing.
It's too much.
amazing.
But did you guys hear about this? What he would do, and this is kind of like the blowing in the cartridge. It may or may not work and stuff like that. He would wrap a humid towel around the console because apparently that helped with some of the heating issues.
I actually have, because a lot of these rumors would spread around like, oh, this is what you can do, this is what you can do. And it became this whole thing of like this kind of like underground conversations of like, how do you fix your Xbox 360? So I actually, hey, I pulled up, I think 5 different tricks that you could do to try and fix your
In
Xbox
2006.
360. Yeah, so this is from digitalinnovations.com, but I thought it'd be fun to read through it. So tip number 1 would be, it says, that's a dirty lens you have there. Overheating is the most common diagnosis for the red ring of death. But before you take the system apart, you need to check something else out first. It is definitely possible that your optical laser lens that reads your disc has been covered with dust. So it would be to clean that. Then tip number 2 would be compressed air. Compressed air is dust's worst enemy. So basically just getting rid of the dust inside the console. Then let's see. It says tip number 3 is local dude living in parents' garage. I have no idea what this
No, Ryan, no. You
Yeah.
take the console to the dude's house, and he will just fix that.
I
He
think
will
this
fix
is just
that up.
I think this is just an ad that they fixed in here in this article.
Because but like for real, because these days it's very common to see like those bootleg cell phone repair shops in either
Oh,
a
yeah.
mall or
Everywhere.
like
Yeah, it was
a
like
strip mall or
it says
somebody's
take it to
van.
like a local repair guy.
Yeah,
Was that tip?
But back then, it was a lot of people working out of their garage. It wasn't as widespread. You could go there and get a 360 fixed or a PS2 with a mod chip.
What if Microsoft deep down just wanted to support local businesses, and by increasing the failure rate, you're opening up more repair shops? Boom!
Oh yeah,
There
that's
you go.
totally
Marketing.
That's totally. So tip number 4 is interesting. It's called the penny trick. So it said, back when I had an Xbox 360, one of the models from 2007 or so, I got a solid 4 years of casual gaming out of it. Before those 3 lights of doom began taunting me, I started combing the dark abyss, and that is YouTube, for cheap red ring of death tips and fixes. Turns out that a trip to Radio Shack, if you know what tools you need, or iFixit, plus a little perseverance in taking the Xbox 360 apart, was all you needed to get back to GTA 4. So there's a video, apparently, and somehow a penny is involved with fixing the Xbox 360. Yeah, pretty wild.
Some MacGyver
And-
stuff right there.
And then
Wow.
finally, the most famous, the towel trick that Juan mentioned, to temporarily fix your Xbox 360. It was to grab 4 or 5 towels, remove any games, hard drives, or controllers, then wrap your Xbox 360 with the towels completely, plug your system into the wall socket, and let it run for 20 minutes. Keep an eye out, as there is a small risk of electrical fire because you are essentially overheating the system a great deal to try and rewrap the motherboard back into place. Unwrap, turn it off, let it cool for another 20 minutes, and it should power back on like normal. There you go.
You know, the sad part is that's something that people actually did, but in 2021, it sounds like the latest Tide Pod trend. Hey, you know what'd be funny? You wrap the console like, a damn towel. It can light your house on fire, but it could also fix the console. Is it worth doing in 2021, Ryan?
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds interesting that the reason it's failing is like somehow something's overheating, but the solution is to overheat it even more
No, Ryan,
to
Ryan,
fixing itself.
After a certain threshold, it just stops detecting heat. It just says, you know what? I'm so hot. I'm feeling cool now.
Yeah,
That's what
like
it's all about.
the worst kind of overclocking, really.
Yeah. And supposedly, this is according to the industry newspaper EE Times. The problem may have started in the graphics chip. Microsoft designed the chip in-house to cut out the traditional vendor with the goal of saving in design cost. Well, that kind of backfired, didn't it? After multiple product failures, Microsoft went back to the original vendor and had the chip redesigned so it would dissipate less heat. So It's kind of like the old saying, hey, you get what you pay for, right? You try to save a little money in the end, you end up spending over $1 billion in repairs and stuff like that. That's a little painful.
It's very painful. I'm sure that was a very hard lesson to learn.
And it was called the Red Ring, of course, because when it died, you would see it was 3. It wouldn't be a full circle, right?
No, it was just
like,
the 3.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the button on the front of the Xbox 360 was the Xbox logo, and it had 4 green lights around it. But when it failed, it would turn into 3 red lights.
And you don't want
and then
that.
it was basically like bricked.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Then that's when you put the towel and burnt your house down.
burn it all down. Forget it. On July 5th, 07, Peter Moore, who we saw on that lovely E3 2005 press conference, they eventually had to do something. He was the vice president of Microsoft. The negative press, at some point, they just couldn't ignore it, right?
You couldn't just say nothing forever. Like, hey, everything's failing. You can't ignore it even though they managed to do it for a long time.
Yeah, they did for a while.
By these standards, in today's day and age, they pulled off quite the heist with how long they were able to say nothing about it, because people would demand like an immediate reaction these days. So to go until like 2007 with it launching in 2005, like, it's kind of impressive, really.
It really was. And they published an open letter. The summary is they extended the 3-year warranty for the console, like they added 3 additional years for general hardware failures, indicating by the red rings of death, right? So this is a quote from Wikipedia, multiple other websites, because the thing that I wanted to get to is we are the consumers, right? Just think about how many consoles are being produced. So I can imagine very early into its life cycle, somebody was saying, hey, Ryan, this is going to happen, but we have like 5 million produced consoles that we can't just like pick and choose and swap all that out. It's going to take, approximately years to fix this. Think about COVID times. We're still dealing with PS5 and Xbox Series X shortages, and that's going to keep on happening. So can you imagine the meeting where everybody's saying, hey, this is messed up, but if we pull the consoles, it could be the demise of the company. But if we don't pull the consoles, it could also be the demise of the company. Yeah. So let's just put it out there. What's going to happen? Can you just imagine being in that meeting?
Yeah, it's an interesting circumstance because it seems like, when food happens, right? Like when food has issues, obviously it's a more sensitive situation because you can kill people basically. But like if they find something in the lettuce, this always happens like every couple of years. There's there's some
raw chicken,
like something with the lettuce. So we're gonna like basically halt everything, like stop the presses. We're gonna make sure everything's good, and then boom, we're back in. But with the 360, so we say things really started to bubble up 2 years after the console comes out. They could have halted and made sure they got it right, but obviously they'd be losing a lot of money. But like you said, they could also be losing more money by continuing to sell people consoles that are going to fail. So it's a tough situation to be in. And I mean, we can even relate that today with like Nintendo. Fix the they could halt and say, hey, let's fix the Joy-Con drift. Let's get this thing right. But no, they know it's going to cost them money somewhere, and they feel like they're going to gamble. They're going to take the gamble of we're going to lose less money by continuing to sell it and figure out something else down the line than it is to halt it, get it right, and start selling newer consoles that are fixed, and then we'll figure out what to do with all the ones that we already sold.
Yeah, I imagine that's exactly the case of what it was, where it was much cheaper just to fix it as they popped up. And it may seem weird to some people that it took this long for it to really boil up, because remember, we're talking about 2007 right now, and the console came out 2 years earlier in 2005, and this is my personal opinion, but I feel like a lot of that has to almost do with like benefit of the doubt on the consumer side, because we all know as consumers, like not everything is going to work perfectly. Like all of these machines, whether it be your phone or these consoles, like it's on an assembly line, there's gonna be one or two that break and you just deal with it. You have the warranty, you get another one, you move on. But as that started to happen for people in late 2005, early 2006, I imagine they thought they were just one of those unlucky people. But then everybody started to be that unlucky person. 1 out of every 3 consumers was having that thing. And because word didn't get around as fast as it did back then, it really I imagine that's what took it so long for there to be action, and then eventually leading to like a class action lawsuit because of the failure rate of these consoles. Like there is a huge window, because I have to imagine, I believe in my heart of hearts that Microsoft knew exactly what they were doing. They wanted to get something out before the PlayStation came out, and then so they could say that they've got the jump on the next generation, and all the early adapters will have to they need to get theirs instead of the PlayStation. Knowing that their chip wasn't ready, they did it anyway. So they had so much time to fix it, but waited and waited and waited until we got to that boiling point we're talking about in 2007. Like I think Microsoft should be held extremely accountable for what happened during that time.
And it's one of those things that in a town with Netflix where people love documentaries, I don't think it'll happen. But from a consumer standpoint, this is fascinating stuff. Like the more I read about this, it's how did this go for so long? And I think it even goes back. I mentioned this in the previous episode. Gaming here wasn't mainstream. It was getting there. Like if this were to happen now, do you think that would take 2 years to get into like the lawsuits? No, we've seen lawsuits happen for virtually nothing, right? So it lets you know that kind of some people went, it's a game console, let's just put it back, which that's like a whole nother can of worms, which can you imagine being the GameStop employee and you're just getting these Red Ring of Death consoles all the freaking time? There's a lot of rumors, and I tried to look up some information. Obviously, nobody's going to attest to this, but there's a lot of rumors that GameStop would just take a lot of these consoles. They would try to fix the chip, at least temporarily, to resell them. And Keith, you brought up the production line. This is once again just an unsighted source, because it's like there'll probably be like lawsuits or NDAs or something like that, especially around the time. But a source cited that at one time, there was just a 32% yield of one of the test productions units. So 68 out of every 100 units were found to be defective. 68 out of 100 of the test units, which if true is just stupid. And listen to this here. This is years after Peter Moore recalled just having a lot of conversations to the point that they would have to ship out these FedEx boxes because the shipping to repair ratio time was about 3 weeks. So if I called Microsoft and I contacted them, there's no way that would happen now. 3 weeks, it seems actually short in hindsight, just knowing the volume. But supposedly, all of those boxes cost Microsoft about $240 million with all the FedEx stuff.
Just the box.
Just in FedEx boxes.
Because keep in mind, it's not like a normal shipping crate, right? You're talking about priority because it is a technical piece of equipment and all this stuff. It's just, I can't believe, I really can't believe it happened. And apparently, and this is, I remember going back into this loop, like I was reading this article and I thought, hey, this is where I came in around this point, 2009. Where you would start to see a lot less of the Red Rings of Death. And if I'm not mistaken, 2008, 2009 is when I got the console. And Microsoft never really... The least consumer thing, right? You're kind of solving the console problem, but you still have all these SKUs out there, right? It's kind of like when they released the second version of the Switch, which people were looking at the boxes. Oh, I don't want the first box. I want the second one. So Microsoft didn't really officially release a new version of the console because the Elite doesn't count for this. So you kind of had to be, well, I'm hoping I get the one that has the problem fixed. Otherwise, I guess I just got to figure it out. But in 2009, Square Trade, a lot of resources decided that it was finally solved. So for context, November '05 is when the console comes out. It's not till 2009, years after the PS3's been out, that it kind of becomes addressed. In hindsight, 2021, what's your take on that? Just how long it took from production to actual revision in getting this fixed?
It's ridiculous. I mean, by this point, we're already looking towards what's the next, console. We're probably like 2 years away from the announcement of like Xbox One X or something. I don't even know. Yeah, it seems like that's just way too long. And I wasn't even aware that the later regular 360 model did solve it. So I'm glad to hear that. I thought it was the Elite was the one that finally solved it.
So the Slim in 2010 is when Microsoft openly said, yo, the problem's fixed, so we're no longer doing the 3-year warranty thing because that's not a problem. These are completely different. My favorite part, I was looking at the article. They completely removed the ability for the actual console to have red rings. They just, you don't get that anymore. Even with the era. Guess what?
Yeah.
You can't get it if it's not there.
Yeah, I know the Elite, there's no red lights in it. So that it just,
can't
no matter
wrong.
what, it could not red ring.
I mean, that's probably a smart design choice just to save them from themselves, really.
It really was. So we aren't going to have a full episode because people may be thinking, yo, you guys just crapped on this console for like almost an hour. The next episode is actually going to be the complete opposite. It's going to be about the legacy. Ryan, in your case, you were the one that were very adamant that we can't talk about the legacy of the console and the defining games, which we will be getting to, without just reacting to this, right? We're not tech analysts. We're not taking this from a, hey, whoa, I would have done things differently. We're just freaking consumers here. What do you think it was so important that we just looked at this and with a fresh set of eyes?
And we can obviously expand on this in the next episode, but I think it's important when you talk about the history of the Xbox 360 that the red ring must be a part of that story, and to fully contextualize that time, that era, we need to talk about the red ring. And I think we can get more to, when we're talking about the legacy of the 360, I think we can get more into the PS3 versus 360 and what were the factors of why the 360 was so dominant for the year. I mean, more than just a year, but during that era. And I think just first contextualizing what was the red ring, what was, how long did it last, all of that, I think it's really part of the story. And the next chapter of that story is how did that impact its war with Sony?
Yeah, and I mean, when you look back at the Xbox 360, like overall, generally, you look back quite fondly. Like, for me, it's one of my favorite consoles ever, but it wasn't always like that, right? Like, they were able to take this system that had a 1 in 3 failure rate, that didn't come with a hard drive, and so many things that went wrong with it, and then turn that around and make it one of the most successful consoles of all time, and one of the best consoles of all time, in my opinion. Like, you have to talk about this to get to there. So I think it was a very important conversation to have.
Just imagine the what-if scenario where the PS3 still came out a year after and you didn't have the red ring. I honestly don't think I would have gone to PS3. Like, you just think about that. This console got...
I agree, totally.
The Gears games, Mass Effects. Ryan, you talked about BioShock. The 360 is a freaking beast of a console. It's still worth playing now. Like, I'm still collecting games for this console. There's a reason that Microsoft, even recently, they released more backward compatible games for the Series than the One because it is a great console. But what if? Could you imagine a scenario where it launched... It flowed. You got yourself the $400 console. You look at Sony, $600 the year after with a ton of game releases. Man, I don't even think Sony would have outlasted all the way to the PS3 Slim, which is really when they started to turn things around. What do you guys think?
Yeah, it would have been dead in the water for imagine the 360 working perfectly and it started getting all of those great games and then Sony would have come a couple of months later and go, it's worth getting a second job for, guys. Ridge Racer. Like they would have 100% have been dead in the water. And even though I think and this is again my opinion, I think you could argue that the Xbox 360 ended up being the quote-unquote winning console of that generation. Like, there wouldn't even be a case for the PS3 if that hypothetical future happened.
Yeah, it's tough to say, but I think the 360, I mean, we don't know if they would have sold less because we see how many 360s
If anything,
a lot
they
of
sold more,
owners.
yeah.
Yeah, we see how many they went through. Like, what was it? I don't know. It'd be fun to find an average of like how many consoles did the average 360 owner go through it. So it's like, is it like the average 360 owner had 1.2 Xbox 360s or something? Who knows?
I'm trying to think. Throughout its lifetime, I think I owned 3. But that was because I upgraded to the Elite at one point. So I think I had one Red Ring and then I ended up buying the Elite later.
And it's sad that you're saying that and you're still the exception to the rule, right?
Yeah.
It's like, oh, you only got
people
one?
that would, yeah. I know, right? Otherwise, though, for the early years, I mean, if there was no Red Ring, I think they would have built up much more goodwill. And for that, I don't know if Sony would have been able to come back from that. I mean, that's all there is to say. I don't know if they would have come back for that because 360 would have been off to the races and there may have been no slowing them down.
So to summarize, the Red Ring of Death was supposedly a chip issue that they did solve. We saw what the console happened. It continued to sell marvelously. It wasn't up until the very end of the PS3's life cycle that it actually outsold the 360 as a whole. Really not by much. It's still mind-blowing that happened, but we really would love to get your feedback about this Red Ring of Death. And if you were a 360 gamer around the point, we really would love to know just, did you have more than one console? What did that look like? Please reach out to us, Quest Rewind on Twitter. That'd be pretty cool. We also have the Discord. If you're listening to us on the podcast feed, the Discord channel is right in the description. And while you're there, please consider dropping the 5-star review. So just to get you ready.
So Ryan can sleep, remember.
Yeah, exactly.
Without those reviews, Ryan
it makes him sleep. Ryan, have you been able to sleep?
It's been a while.
You look like hell, Ryan. You look like hell. You look horrible.
Thank you.
No, I love you, though. But last week, we talked about the reveal, right? It was the E3 2005 press conference impressions. Before that, you can actually check out our watch-along. Now, next week, we're going to talk about the legacy of the 360. Far removed from the Red Ring of Death, there's a lot of stuff from the wireless controller, Xbox Live. So I think it's going to be a very positive conversation. Then after that, we're going to be talking about the defining games for the console for us. So this is where it's going to just get very personal. We literally just have games listed, and it's just a matter of let's throw out a couple games in there and react to the ones that we resonated with the most. I know we're going to eventually talk about games like Super Street Fighter 4 or Resident Evil 5, which Keith and I played those two obsessively. And then we will be concluding this journey, this quest, if you will, by talking about one of Keith's favorite games of all time. We talked about the first one when we were still a cast of the past, and it's now time to talk about Mass Effect 2. Keith, talk to me, buddy.
I'm sending you on a suicide mission, baby.
It's got to happen.
There might not be any coming back. Yeah, this is one of my favorite games of all time. I've mentioned it if you've been a fan of us for a while. I've mentioned it is my favorite game of all time and one of the best games of the last decade as far as I'm concerned. I recently played through it when the Legendary Edition came out. I'm going to play through it again for this review just because I can, and this, like, Mass Effect 1 was kind of the building block of the franchise, and this is where things got crazy, like as far as the whole making your decisions and different ways your playthrough can go. So I'm just excited to talk about all of the things that you guys do throughout that game and the story of your Shepard. I can't wait for us to review that game.
It's going to be a fun time. I'm really looking forward to Ryan's response with this, because it's a game that both Keith and I have experienced before. So I'm going back to it. Keith is beating the game like the 15th time or whatever. So if all of you want to join us for the ride, please consider playing the game, so that way when we actually talk about it, the first part, because if anybody's curious, it will be spoiler free just as far as like our general impressions, but we want to get to the nitty-gritty.
You gotta go in the weeds, baby.
Oh, yeah.
That is a story game, and we need to talk about our story.
The game is about making decisions, so we will get to that. So hey, you got a couple weeks, buddies. You got about 3 weeks to get ready for that. So catch you next week on another exciting edition of Quest Rewind.